Hey guys, Level Cap here, and today I want to talk about Battlefield 2042's big gimmick and the history of gimmicky mechanics in the Battlefield franchise. I was inspired to make this video today because Battlefield leaker Tom Henderson posted a tweet yesterday in which he said early feedback of tornadoes in Battlefield 2042 are essentially that they are fun and cool to see for the first few times, but they become very repetitive and ruin the classic Battlefield experience and flow of the map. And while this feedback might be from a game in its alpha state, it is important to consider DICE's history with gimmicky game mechanics and whether or not they've been able to balance them properly so that they add to the gameplay instead of detract from it. And this specific concern isn't something that Tom's tweet is making me think about for the first time. Back on June 9th, when I posted my opinion piece about the 2042 reveal, I briefly mentioned that although tornadoes looked cool, I think it runs the risk of losing its wow factor quickly and potentially becoming an annoyance to tactical gameplay. Basically, my concerns were exactly what Tom is now saying he has heard from multiple sources who have played the game. Now, for anyone watching this video thinking, well, hang on Level Cap, the game is not even out yet and Tom's tweet is about alpha gameplay and he even mentions that the spawn rates of tornadoes could be adjusted before launch, perhaps your concerns are unfounded. And as much as I would love to believe that my concerns are unfounded and that DICE always does the thing that's best for the gameplay at the end of the day, I have to reference Battlefield's history of gimmicky mechanics that often ruined or at least lessened the gameplay experience. One of the worst gimmicks of the Battlefield franchise was actually from Battlefield 3. Battlefield 3's base game design actually had very little in the way of gimmicks and instead just touted one of the best looking visual upgrades to any gaming franchise. And when you have a game so impressive from the get-go, you really just don't need to jazz up the trailer with extra BS to try and get sales. It was purely focused on the tech and tactical gameplay from the start. However, after the game launched and they had been through a couple of DLCs, DICE felt that they needed to spice things up, and when their Armored Kill expansion launched, they added the AC-130. By now, most modern shooter fans probably know what this plane does, and for those of you that don't, it's a massive artillery plane that circles around a battlefield and blows everything up from far away. It sounds pretty cool, and frankly it is, right up until you're on the receiving end of it. The AC-130 in Battlefield 3 was so OP that it effectively ruined the rush game mode on all 4 of the new expansion's maps. I made several videos where I did nothing but just wait to spawn into the AC-130 and easily topped 100 kills by the end of the game. You could go on 30 plus kill streaks no problem and single-handedly stop an entire enemy team in their tracks. The only way to take it down in certain situations was to overwhelm its countermeasures with enough lock-on missiles, which required massive coordination from many players. It was such a bad game mechanic that it 100% ruined an entire mode on 4 different maps and was a serious annoyance in the Conquest mode as well. It wasn't fun to fight against and it just didn't add anything to the game other than opportunities for cool marketing cinematics. Now, it did have a couple of patches that of course took way too long to come out, but ultimately this mechanic was just really bad, to the extent that when they added the AC-130 back in Battlefield 4, its power was massively nerfed to the point that you could more or less ignore it a lot of the time. Now, speaking of Battlefield 4, everyone who played the game knows the term Levolution. This was the new super destruction that you could engage in the new game maps, like famously taking down the Siege of Shanghai Tower. It looked fantastic in the trailers and it even looked badass in the game while it was coming down. However, as was quickly discovered by the community after playing the game for a while, the Shanghai map played so much worse after the tower came down, and it even blanketed the entire map in a gray ash that essentially made it look like you were playing a white box version of the game. The Levolution mechanic ended up making the gameplay flow much worse in that map and could be argued the same for many other maps, or at the very least that Levolution did not integrate itself in a cool or natural way. Players essentially had to exit from battle for a while to focus on, say, destroying a dam, which would change the map layout but never really affected the gameplay in a strategic way, so it was always simply done as a gimmicky mid-round effect. Now how about Battlefield 1, a game that got so many things right and took so many risks, and even its gimmicky mechanic, I would argue that DICE tried to make as much not a gimmick as possible, but just couldn't quite do it. The behemoths, massive vehicles that would appear during a round to bring huge firepower to the losing team. A cool idea on paper, but in a lot of maps the vehicles only added random deaths to players on the receiving teams. Fighting them often wasn't fun, although I will concede and say that taking down an airship with a fighter plane was actually really rewarding, but in most other circumstances it was a chore. And occasionally the behemoths themselves were completely game-breaking. Ballroom Blitz on Breakthrough would allow the airship to spawn in sectors where the defending team had no anti-air capabilities, so they would essentially just have to give up the sector and fall back. On Foul Fortress, the Dreadnought could sit far off the coast and just rain down shells on infantry and tanks all game who had no way of fighting back against it. They were visually some of the most impressive gimmicky mechanics added to any Battlefield game, but DICE could never quite balance out that behemoth formula to the point where it always added to the gameplay. It often detracted from it, even though I have to admit the visuals of a crashing airship mid-round were impressive almost every single time. And of course there were other things scattered around the various other titles like Battlefield 5's Flying Bombs and Battlefield 4's Gulf of Oman's Endless Sandstorm. And I will say the difference between a gimmick and an awesome feature is, well, the developer's abilities to make it add to the gameplay versus just adding to the trailer. And again, I think Battlefield 1 came close in some regards with their behemoths, but they couldn't quite take it all the way. Battlefield 4 could have made Levolution an event where teams could trigger it in a specific way to change the map to their benefit, allowing teams to fight over how to, say, knock over the skyscraper in Shanghai or where to break a dam. But instead, most of these concepts only really scratched the surface of strategy and instead injected themselves as marketing gimmicks. Tornadoes absolutely seem like they will fall into this vein of game design. They're a big focus in the reveal trailer, seemingly have no way to control on a tactical level, and instead just add chaos to any given situation. Will it be fun when you just wiped out 2 full defending squads and are about to capture a point, only for a tornado to spawn in and kill you? Sure, maybe the first 2 times, but after a while I can't see how this mechanic won't get old. And so far as I can tell, the only way to alleviate or fix the problem, especially from suggestions that I've seen online, is to simply reduce how often tornadoes can spawn. And of course I have to wonder if the only way to make a certain mechanic better is to just limit how often it can even happen. You do have to wonder, is this even a good mechanic in the first place? Now, will tornadoes absolutely ruin Battlefield 2042's gaming experience? No, I highly doubt it. In fact, I'm sure the tornado events are limited to certain game modes, and I would imagine most of your time will probably be spent playing the game without a tornado ravaging the landscape. Of course, looking at it from a business perspective, I think it's almost too risky not to add in marketing gimmicks to sell your game, especially in the AAA space. The game industry is so competitive nowadays that you can't release a AAA game that is just supposed to wow with solid, well-balanced tactical gameplay. You gotta throw in those wow factors to catch the gamer who wants a little something more. And I do think that DICE could appease everyone if their gimmicks were actually designed in a way to be really fun, engaging design choices. And I think it's safe to say that the difference between a gimmick and a really cool feature is just how it's implemented. You could look at the Battlefield 2 trailer, which was 100% combat focused right up to the end when a big artillery strike is called in and blows up a whole base, killing everyone. It looked great in the trailer and certainly brought more consumers on board. But if that mechanic was implemented poorly just for the sake of getting it into the trailer, it would have been a gimmick. However, because artillery strikes were player controlled and you even had the option to sabotage the enemy team's artillery cannons, effectively knocking out their commander's ability to even call in artillery strikes, it became a much more strategic element of the gameplay. Players were even given a warning on the map when an artillery strike was coming, so good players could take measures to try and avoid them, whether it was getting out of the blast radius or getting indoors. I have to wonder, could Battlefield 2042 have been a significantly better game if instead of adding in tornadoes as the gimmicky effect, what if it was an ion cannon strike that was player controlled or commander controlled? That could have been a cool strategic element, much similar to Battlefield 2's artillery strikes, without having to inject some sort of random chaotic nature to the whole thing. I always have and always will try and hold DICE to a higher design standard. If you can implement a cool gimmicky feature that also benefits the gameplay, then go for it. If the gimmick is only going to look good in a trailer and ultimately annoy the player base, then design something else. At the end of the day though, I don't think tornadoes will ruin Battlefield 2042, and if they are really bad, I think the devs will probably scale them way back. But I also think DICE just can and should do better in regards of inventing new catches that differentiate their game in big ways. A random tornado that throws everyone into the air is some SimCity level silliness and could be viewed as both a gimmick and missed opportunity to do something much more innovative instead. What do you guys think? What was your first thought when you saw the tornado in the Battlefield 2042 reveal trailer, and are you looking forward to seeing them in game? As always guys, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time. This is Level Cap signing off.